Well, part two of me being just a little bit lazy and doing another Q&A instead of just thinking up my own topics and doing the work. But I think I really enjoy doing these videos, and judging by the view numbers, you guys seem to really enjoy me doing them as well. So let's get into it. Hi, I'm Pete McConville, and here I like to overthink, overanalyze, and basically just geek out on watches far more than they probably deserve. Today, what I'm doing is part two in answering some questions you guys put to me through my community tab a couple of days ago. And I'm going to kick off with Kirk Hilton, who asks a really interesting question about the idea of anti-ambassadors. Here he's asked the question, if someone else that I disliked started wearing a watch that I was into, he clearly knows I'm a Breitling and Alpina guy, would that affect me? Would that put me off? You know what? No, it absolutely would not. I don't care who else buys the watch. That's not really my problem. But what would put me off potentially would be if Breitling or Alpina or any brand I was into started choosing ambassadors that for whatever reason kind of conflicted with who I thought I was. I think people get ambassadors kind of around the wrong way. People think of ambassadors as somehow the ambassador chose the brand and that's a mark of honor for the brand. That's true in about 1% of cases. In most cases, what it is the brands have chosen the ambassador, very much like a country chooses an ambassador, as a person who they think represents the brand, their values, their morals, their ethics, who they stand for, that sort of thing. So if a brand started choosing people that I found reprehensible, that would probably indicate that the brand and I are beginning to go in different directions. So it's not so much that I would, leave a brand because of an ambassador, but rather a brand's choices for who would represent them could be an indicator that myself and a brand are going in different directions. So George Newen Bryson asked a second question. He got one in the first video as well. Gets a second one. Why do I think Blancpain are so hell-bent on never producing the one watch everyone wants them to produce? The classic 50 fathoms in something other than gargantuan sizes, something say around 40 millimeters. They do it for their for special editions, limited editions every year or so. A couple of Blancpain 50 fathoms in 40 millimeters will come out. They will immediately be sold, and you go back to the big 45 pluses. George, I don't know. I don't get it. It seems like such an obvious thing to do, and I don't understand why they don't. Maybe there's some great reason for it, but I have a suspicion what we're seeing here is the general incompetence in the management, marketing, and sales of Blancpain. In a world where there's all this premiumization going, where all of these big high-end brands are making money hand over fist and growing enormously, it is remarkable how Swatch has managed to make sure that Breguet and Blancpain go nowhere and flounder when everyone else is growing. I can only put it down to rank incompetence. Okay, so Jay Burgess took my Ask Me Anything literally and has asked me a question. AI, should I be afraid or should we be afraid? Yes and no. I'll answer it pretty straightforwardly. Any change is scary. Every change will hurt someone. I don't care if it's the introduction of Steam, the internet, mobile phones, ATMs or AI. Someone is hurt by every one of those changes. Many people are going to be hurt by what happens when AI rolls out. But most of us won't be. Most of us will just roll on doing something similar to what we've been doing, just changed a little bit. Should you be afraid? No, I think it's like I look at AI like we used to look at those terrorism warnings. Be alert but not alarmed. Keep an eye out, but maybe don't buy a robot servant, or if you do and you're in America, maybe don't arm them. That's probably what I'd say. Okay, so Ollie K has asked a double-barreled question. I'll kick off with the first bit. What's my take on Glashutte Original? I love them as a brand. I love that Germanic, really sort of formal, disciplined look. There's something very appealing for me in that. Glashutte Original do that brilliantly. They also play nicely and do some interesting things with their CQ, making a kind of playful Germanic watch, which in some ways makes no sense, but somehow they find a way to do it. I think the only thing wrong with Glashutte Original is that they happen to be from Glashutte, and as a result, they use a lot of standard Glashutte sort of watchmaking ideas, tropes, whatever you want to call it. And as a result, they end up getting compared to A. Lange & Söhne, and they often get kind of labeled with an A. Lange & Söhne wannabe or copy, which is unfortunate and it's unfair and it's untrue, in that really they're just being true to who they are and the region they're from and reflecting the history of that region. But they get thrown a lot of shade by people who don't understand that. So I think it's a great brand. I think the finishing and the designs and the quality that you get are incredible. And it sounds weird because they're not cheap, but they're probably decent value. Which brings me to the second part of your question. What do I think about the MSRP hikes over the last few years? Look, I wish they weren't happening. I feel sad watching watches leave me. There's watches that I had sort of set my heart on and was thinking one day I might get there, and they're going past the point I can afford. I've made no bones about the fact. I spoke about this on my podcast, Hot Take Time. Go search for it on Google. Where, for example, I bought the JLC Polaris. I paid just a little bit over 13,000 Australian for that. Now, if I was going to buy that, it's over 16,000 Australian. I'm not sure if I could afford it anymore. I could when I bought it, but could I now? I'm not sure. So I'm not happy. I'm a little saddened. But then on the other hand, I'm not angry. I'm not shaking my fist at the sky. Something I keep coming back to is, if you look at the annual reports from Richemont or LVMH or the Kering Group back when they had a watch company, the watchmakers were the least profitable parts of those big groups. So you can argue that, these big groups don't pay tax, they minimize their profits, blah, blah, blah. But if they do that, they do it uniformly across all of their business units. So you'd imagine that that sort of, if you like, tax minimization techniques would turn up equally in the whiskey and perfume and fashion area as they do in watches. But that doesn't seem the case. It seems that those areas are making far more money than the watchmakers, which makes me think that maybe we've been getting it good for a little while. Maybe we've been getting watches a little bit cheaper than we should have. And maybe what you're seeing now is within the weird world of luxury, within the bizarre space of luxury men's jewelry, because that's all watches are, we've actually been getting these things a little bit cheaper than the market should have been selling them to us. And what we're getting now, as unfortunate as it is, as much as I wish it wasn't happening, is not actually surprising. It's not profiteering. It's actually where the luxury men's jewelry / watches should have been anyway. That's a sad thought, and it's not something I like, but yeah, maybe that's just it. Okay, so Joel Brown's asked me a question about what do I think about brand revivals, and he uses 3 examples here which are interesting. Fears, Vulcain, Excelsior Park, and goes on a little bit. What if there's no real link to the past brand? Do they often just seem like replicas, et cetera, et cetera? And in particular, how is this different to, say, a brand which hasn't gone out of production or hasn't gone completely dormant, but just changed ownership? I think in every one of those cases, you kind of have to look at each case on its own merit. It's always tempting to try and come up with a sort of catch-all, this is what's happening and this is going to be bad for every brand. But I really do honestly think you have to look at each and every brand kind of in isolation. Because take Fears and Vulcain Excelsior Park. And if you take, I'll go back for a second. Take Vulcain, Excelsior Park, and throw Nivada Grechen in there. All three brands now owned by the same guy, and all of them doing the same, I'll call it shtick, which is, depending on how you look at it, faithful or lazy reproductions or replicas of watches from a bygone era. And it's really up to each and every one of us, you, to decide, is this guy buying these old brands, reaching into the catalog and doing nothing but churning out reproductions of what that brand once did 30 years ago? Is that a wonderful nod to the history of horology and something we should all be applauding? Or is that a lazy, raiding of other people's history and profiting off other people's work? You know what? I don't know. I genuinely don't know how to read that. Take that guy in particular. There's a part of me that thinks, that sounds like such a cash grab to establish some brands and then flog them off later. But then on the other hand, when you hear him interviewed, he does seem to be genuinely into watches, particularly vintage watches. And he genuinely is coming at this from a place of enthusiasm and wanting to recreate watches that he loved and make them available to people again. So, and then compare that to Fears, where you've got Nicholas, who I know personally, so I'm kind of biased here. Nicholas, who's deeply passionate about watches, recreates what was a family brand, his family's brand, and has gone to amazingly done well with it. And some of the things he did with through the COVID times to keep this going and make sure his employees were getting paid. So at the same time he's trying to run a watch brand, he's stacking shelves at a supermarket, is just incredible and deserves all the success and all the plaudits he's got. So again, Joel, I can't give you a nice, simple catch-all answer. I think time will tell. Will Nicholas Scargill, Bowman Scargill, continue to work and continue to grow Fears and take it in new places? If so, great. Or on the other hand, will he sort of just continue to do what he's doing now, make a bit more money, sell the company on and move on, which I think is extraordinarily unlikely for Nicholas? Then, you know what, maybe I'm not such a big Fears fan. Likewise for this guy behind Vulcain, Excelsior Park and Nivada Grechen. The jury's out. I think that it is possible for people of good faith, genuine enthusiasts, to really take these brands and create something great out of them. It's also possible for them to completely besmirch the reputation of once great brands and drag it through the mud. I don't know how this is going to pan out. We'll see. Okay, so last question. Underachieving Watch Collector asks, Pete, do I have a retirement watch in mind? I've made no bones about the fact I'm approaching retirement. And that's an excellent question. And yes and no. I have begun to think about a retirement watch. I have begun to think, when I don't know how it works in other countries, but when I retire, I will get a bit of a bonus type thing. I'll have a pile of cash bigger than I would usually have. Great opportunity to perhaps at that point buy that one big watch, which I wouldn't really be able to do at any other time. I have started to think about that. What would it be? I have no idea. I truly, really don't. I'm just getting to the point of thinking that there might be one, but I genuinely don't know what it might be. If anyone's got any ideas, leave them in the comments below. Anyway, so that's it. I've been Pete McConville. This is me answering your questions. Always love doing it. Ask me whatever you want, whenever you want. I'll always make one of these videos. Hope you enjoyed this. Like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff, and we will see each other later. Bye.